on part 4 of the study guide for the Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression. So number 31 is asking, why do people call shanty towns Hoovervilles? Basically, they blame this guy over here for the Depression, and everything that was wrong, they kind of more or less throw on him. Now, it's not saying that he spent their money or that he's the one who invested poorly, but what they are saying is that he's not helping them through his indirect relief or his refinance corporation. So he's not doing enough, and so they blame him. They just don't have Hoovervilles, they also have Hoover flags, an empty pocket turned out. And so people are getting upset, and he's up for re-election in 1932. And if this guy you feel isn't doing his job, then you'll take a gamble and you'll vote the other guy in. And so FDR is going to get in because pretty much Hoover's approval rating is rock bottom low. Question 32 is, what did the Harlem Renaissance celebrate? It really celebrates African culture and the heritage. So we have African Americans who've been living here. They had the whole slavery thing. You got segregation going on in the country, Jim Crow laws, the KKK. And so what starts to happen is there's an intellectual, artistic revival and an interest in what is African culture. And so this is Zora Neale Hurston, the lady who wrote Their Eyes Were Watching God, and here she is beating on a traditional African drum. So it's not odd if you went to Harlem, New York, and you would see a celebration of what it meant to be African American. The Harlem Renaissance and the NAACP all kind of starts, in this early time of the 1900s. And so what you're going to see is these people will have children, and they're going to teach their children to have pride in your culture and who you are and where you have come. And so that's really going to be the people who will kind of start the foundation for the civil rights era that you guys know of, the 50s and the 60s. Question 33 is, what treaty outlawed defensive war? And it's the Kellogg-Briand Pact. So, and we need to fix this. It's offensive war. You're not really allowed to do any sort of attack. Per the Kellogg-Briand Pact, what you're supposed to do is use the League of Nations, and you're supposed to really be fixing any sort of problem. We're going to talk more about this when we look at World War II, but instead of you going to war, you need to go to the League, you need to go to the World Court, and you need to figure out what's going on. And the Kellogg-Briand Pact really outlaws that. You're not really allowed to make any offensive land-grabbing attacks. Now, if you got attacked, you're not really supposed to do any defensive war. Either you're supposed to really go to the World Court, they're supposed to really kind of fix it. Question 34 is, what act was intended to reduce immigration? This is really spurred on by the nativism and the KKK during this time period. It's the Emergency Quota Act. And this is the one where if you have 5 people from this country and that country was like an Asian country, you would only take 5 to the 100 that you would take from a Western European country. So the Western European countries where there's more white Protestants, Anglo-Saxons, they're going to have preferential treatment in the immigration process. But it really greatly reduces immigration altogether, because during this time period we have the new immigrants. And so the new immigrants, remember, they don't speak English, they're not Anglo-Saxon, they're not typically Protestant, they're another religion. And so the Klan is really going to promote this, and so are other nativist groups that are anti-immigration. Question 35 is, name the major problem facing farmers in the 1920s. Is really overproduction of their products. The world's not buying their products anymore, but they continue to produce enough for world consumption. This is Dorothea Lange's famous picture of the migrant mother, and here is a mother, and she's actually in California, and she is a mother of 7 kids, and they pick peas. And, I mean, this picture says a lot. If you look at her face, what is she thinking? What is going on? And here are 2 children kind of clinging to her. And so all these pictures, all of these stories are being reported back to FDR, and that's why he sends them out there with the Federal Writers Project and all these projects that he does to get artists back to work. And so in the 1930s, you're really seeing it hit hard for our farmers. Question 36 is, what was a flapper? A flapper is just a female who reject the kind of traditional role like their mom had. They're going to be very independent. They vote, they work, they do a lot of different things than their mom would do. So The Great Gatsby is kind of like the epitome of flappers and flapper culture. They drink in public, they smoke, they cut their hair off, it's very short, they wear dresses that reveal their legs and their arms. They just are very different than the Victorian female. And this group, they do get married, they do have kids. They aren't using birth control during this part, but when they have kids, they're going to teach their kids, like this freedom, this legacy kind of lives on. World War II rolls around, you're going to have the Rosies, and this is kind of like where we get this foundation for the feminist movement in the 50s and the 60s. Question 37 is, what's the purpose of the Grapes of Wrath? It's really to show the burden, the plight of the Okies. And so here's a group of Okies. It's just a group of people who decide to leave Oklahoma because of the Dust Bowl and go out west to California. When they're in California, they're not treated very well either. The California farmers don't like them. They do hurt the Okies. They don't pay for them to actually pick the products. And even when there is a little spot of land, they'll actually, like if an Okie tries to plant some food for his family and the actual landowner finds out that there are people doing that, they'll go and they'll just tear it up instead of letting people have the food. So during this book, he really talked, John Steinbeck, he really did talk to the farmers, and he uses that to make his story. 38 is, how did Americans feel about the American dream during the Great Depression? It's over. It was a lie. So you were told that if you worked hard, you would actually be rewarded and you would do well in life. And then it didn't work. The dream fell out. And so they feel like they're not going to get it. And some people don't actually ever get back to that fact that if you work hard, you will actually succeed in America. There are going to be people who their American dream is a busted dream, and they'll never dream it again. They believe that this is a nightmare. Now, America does recover, but there are people who just simply don't. Question 39 is, what's the purpose of the SEC? The SEC is the Security and Exchange Commission, and it's supposed to prevent another stock market by watching any insider trading, any untruthful or misleading company reports. Like when they report their earnings, they're supposed to report the truth, so it also watches that. Their big job is to make certain that everybody is being honest and upfront in stocks. They did actually arrest Martha Stewart for insider trading. Insiders trading is when you know something that most shareholders wouldn't know. So you know someone who knew somebody, you had some inside word, that's why it's called insider trading. Question 40 is, who is A. Mitchell Palmer? He is an attorney general during the first Red Scare, and basically he leads suspected raids on communists. And so they actually do a lot of, ads and campaign and propaganda trying to get Americans to turn in anyone suspected of communist or anarchist activity. So the Bolshevik Revolution happened in Europe, and so they've become communist in Russia. And so what you're seeing is kind of this effect. And communism hasn't made, any lies about it. They've been very honest that they want to spread communism. There's some bad stuff that goes on in America, some cities, some bombs blow up, even at Palmer's own home. He's a target. And so it's the first Red Scare. It's just not as big as the second Red Scare. The second Red Scare is a little bit more massive. But he's using the Espionage and Sedition Act to actually go after people. So just be careful with what you say. Question 41 is, why did the Red Scare occur? It's the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia that now is the Soviet Union. A lot of nativism, a lot of anti-immigration, the belief that American-born people are better than the immigrants. So all this kind of fuels the first Red Scare. 42 is how did the political leadership of the U.S. react after World War I? Warren G. Harding becomes the president, and he really does this return to normalcy. Let's go back to the old way, where we're neutral, we're isolated, we don't get involved in world affairs. The economy is the economy. The government's not going to be involved in it. Question 43 is describe the Teapot Dome scandal. So this is an oil scandal dealing in the Harding administration. So the Secretary of Interior actually takes bribes. He takes money from oil companies to go ahead and open up Federal Reserve land. And we looked at the political cartoon in class, but that's kind of like the most famous one. But he actually does go to jail. But this doesn't look good for the Harding administration. You have a major scandal. You're going to open up Federal Reserve land, land that's been conserved for the future, for oil companies, and your guy is getting rich doing it. And this land was not supposed to be opened up. And so some people do, they do go to jail over it. It's a bad thing. 44, where did jazz music originate? It's going to be New Orleans. So this is actually Louis Armstrong and a monument to him in New Orleans. And so it kind of originates in New Orleans, and it starts to move up to the clubs in New York. And so jazz is just the music of the 1920s. So the last question is 45. How did the automobile impact American life? Everybody wanted a car. And this is going to become true again in the 1950s. Like the car culture kind of really develops in the 1950s, and you get the muscle cars in the 60s. When Hoover comes to the office in 28, he goes ahead and he promises everybody's going to have 2 cars in their garage. And that's just crazy, 2 cars. Ooh. But back then that was a mark of prosperity if you had a car. It kind of become a symbol of success. It's the same thing with people who own really luxurious cars. You own a Cadillac Escalade, my hat off to you. Those suckers start at $75,000. So you must be pretty successful. I'm just a teacher, I'm good if I could afford, any car on a car lot. But when the Depression happens, people will sell their car. This is a nice luxurious vehicle right here. But he's willing to take $100 because he's lost everything in the stock market. The big 3, the Detroit car companies, buy up all these cars that people are willing to sell, and they destroy them all because they don't want people to be able to buy a used car during the Depression. They still want you to buy a new car. And so that's going to be kind of something that you'll see as a trend. If all these used cars are out there and they're flooding the market, prices drop, people are able to buy the used car. So Ford, all of them, they just buy up all these old ones, destroy them, and now you'll be forced to buy a new car. And that will happen kind of during the 1950s and 1960s. People will get a car for dad and a car for mom.